you guys fine?
Actually, I'm fine now.
Yeah. We're good.
Itu bisa lumatukod.
Ito dito wala.
Imuli doy papu. Ito pinamuhay.
Okay, sorry.
Kito good mo.
I'll start first, like, just I never do introductions at the beginning just because I think introductions are best kept towards the end. I feel like
Yes.
somebody's material should speak for the person's identity before the person like gets introduced. So I really strongly believe in that philosophy, and I guess like we'll just keep it towards that. But yeah, like we all have known each other to different degrees and in different environments, and I'd like to kind of like talk about that a bit. Um, Obviously we know each other since we were teenagers, and I wanted to know for each of you, what was it like growing up as a teenager back home? Vegen, if you want to go first.
I think for me, I went to RCPL and it was an all boys school, and there was that strong cutthroat like environment where you have to have that competitive mindset. You have to be ambitious. You have to aim for that CCNT for your middle school exams, or even aim for the laureate scholarships when you're competing in your high school. So for me, my teenagehood wasn't really a typical teenagehood as a lot of people in the Western world have lived it through. It was basically going to school and then going to private tuitions, which is something we do in Mauritius, where you go to a teacher's house after school hours and you basically take private lessons without teacher in a classroom full of 40 other kids from different schools around the country. So my experience of teenagehood was like that. And now that I came to college here in a Western country, a lot of times I've reflected on that, on my experience growing up as a teenage boy in Mauritius, because a lot of my friends here who grew up here or even in other countries, they've had a radically different teenagehood. Like, oh, I enjoyed playing music. I enjoyed going like playing basketball with my friends after school hours, or just casually falling in love with the Harry Potter book series and doing a marathon run of um, all the Twilight book series, for example. This is something I never personally experienced because I felt absorbed into that competition.
System.
And yeah, I had to assimilate it in a way. So that was my experience. I know it's boring, but yeah, that was
How
my
was yours,
teenage boy.
Priya?
Yeah, no, believe me, Vegen, like mine was pretty much similar as yours. We've all like grown up in the same Mauritius, right? Where the focus was just like school. And I guess school was a lot of things. There was a lot of focus on excellence, on hard work, which obviously like very good qualities and values to have since like small, right? But these could easily turn out to be unhealthy, especially when there was a lot of pressure, or when the competition was not constructive but more destructive. I would also say that school was liberating in some sense, where we were made to believe that we can achieve anything we want, where we could dream. But it was at the same time oppressive because there was only a lot of focus only on academics and not on the extracurricular stuff, which I wished I could spend more time doing. But overall, I think school was also very fun. I think Baron also you can relate to that. The bonds you make at school, they are forever, right? They are those friends that you make forever. You go through like hardships together. You go through like fun times together. I think, yeah, my teenage years were mostly around like discovering a little bit of myself, a lot of like investing at school and making those friends that stay with you for a lifetime, I would say.
Plus, I'm gonna add, Priya now recently bought a guitar, so she's catching up.
Listen, I was
On her musical creativity side, that she probably didn't horn.
I was actually like I started doing like music a little bit at school, but yeah, getting out of school is when I had like more time to like focus on these things and discover all the great stuff about
and
music.
also COVID. Yeah, COVID gave us time.
Yeah.
Do you feel though that you had a choice not to be that way, or that somehow there was more an engulfing power that was quite invisible in nature? because when I hear your stories, and I kind of like share notes as well with us being part of the international community now, right? Like we've got um mates who are local or mates who are from different countries, and then they tell you how their experiences were growing up, and you kind of like started thinking about like, oh my god, did I actually have a choice, or did I just succumb to what the system was all about? How do you feel about that?
I personally think I had a choice in my case, and I think it's a very personal question because it's all about what kind of expectations your parents have of you, the kind of school you went to. My parents never put any pressure on me personally to achieve XYZ in my life. I put that pressure on myself, and that was a choice I made again. Um, Not even be like when I went to RCPL, but it was a choice I made since I was still in primary school because I was doing well at school. I enjoyed doing it. I felt like the gratification I would get from excelling in my classes, it would provide me such a level of bliss that like it was addictive in a way, and I chose to pursue that path. um but you always have a choice, and I personally always had that choice. Like my whenever there were times when it was really tough and my parents could see me like putting so much effort into studying or anything else basically, and they know that it's not 100% success rate, like there's a probability you could fail. They would always reassure me and be like, okay, failure is okay, you chose that, but I'm just happy that you're happy doing what you do. And even later when I went to college, what I studied, I didn't have to persuade them a lot. I didn't have to hide from them in a way what I was majoring in or anything. I just had to tell them, and the only thing they ever asked me was I were I happy, and that was it. But
Yeah, I think for me as well, my parents, were very supportive. There was obviously a pattern that you see around you where all your cousins or my sister or my elder cousins, they're all like getting into medicine or becoming lawyers, all of that, right? But and you obviously want to be like them, but I don't think I was not given the choice. My parents told me that I could do, go pursue whatever I wanted, and that I shouldn't have to restrict myself from exploring any other like fields that I wanted to. And I think, yeah, obviously I had the choice. I think one of the things I wished I had was more failure, because it's hard for you to cope with failure when all you've been doing your whole life is excelling and
so
getting those nice grades and
yeah.
everything going in that perfect path, right? So I wished I experienced more of that when I was little, because it's not always a bad thing, failure, obviously. And when you grow up to be an adult, you need to know how to deal with it and how to make that become, sort of a constructive feedback for yourself. Um, yeah,
I
that's a
cannot
little bit about my
I
journey.
second that. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
No, like I
Oh my
cannot more than agree. And like I'm so glad that you bring this up, Priya, and I'll tell you why. Um, there's this thing that I don't think growing up we realize, especially coming from the school backgrounds that we all came from, um, that we were so used to always having the good grades. We're so used to never ever even having like forget a D, like you never even see a C or a B. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
you know what? Like you just get so used to having things in life. Um, coming from this very elitist school background, being part of like this community of like, high achievers, that when you fail for the first time in your 20s, you're like, wow, I went through 20 years of my life not knowing what it was like to be in a situation where you actually have to, feel a bit like, oh my God, what? And the first time you learn that you actually fail at something, you're like, no, no, like, can you check
That's
again?
not possible.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a trauma. It's a freaking trauma response of being such a high achiever at everything that the first time you achieve low in something, you just go like, and I 100% relate to that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Definitely. I'd like to actually jump into exactly what we convene to talk about. And I'll probably start
Yay.
off by sharing how Vegen and I met actually, like how he broached before. In Mauritius, we've got this very intense, robust schooling system, and it's highly competitive. And there's also this notion of private tutoring, and that's where we met. And I'd like to
Yeah.
say met in between inverted commas because I'm not sure we ever met. And that's probably like an essential issue with how the system goes around, right? Obviously, there are certain changes today. It's been like more than 7 years since we left like school. However, still, there was a discomfort in talking to either be it the opposite sex or be it just people who are new around you, right? Like just having that kind of like an extra step. You mentioned that, and that's a question. Like, yeah, please share that as like for an answer as well. That when you left Mauritius, being part of the single sex education system, and you had to join college, it was almost like a massive lack of compass. How do I talk to the opposite sex? How do I relate in an environment where suddenly there are boys and girls studying together? Who wants to go first, please? Whoever.
I'm gonna jump in. Um, I'm gonna say this because um, a lot of times I've never thought of that question from this perspective because in my mind it was like we went to a single sex education system in Mauritius, like OCPL, Creasy, they were all single sex schools. But the fact that we had the private tutoring sessions after school hours, I always had in my mind that okay, well, I'm still getting that mixed exposure, like mixed gender exposure even outside of school hours, so I'm fine. But it's just that it wasn't really that level of mixity that you would spot when you went to college later on, because like you said, we took GP tuition together and we would basically be standing next to each other waiting for like the session to start, and we would never talk to each other, never.
Ever.
I don't know if you were intimidating or I was intimidating, or it was just that there was a barrier. Like
Yeah.
guys don't talk to girls, or girls don't that way. And even in the classroom, there was clearly a barrier. Like girls would sit on one table and guys would sit on one table,
Right.
and that was how it was. But I was always in my mind that I'm gonna be okay because I've had that experience. Girls are sitting next to me or whatever, a bit like a few meters away, but sure. And then I went to college. The experience was radically different because first you're in a lecture room. Guys and girls are sitting next to each other, sometimes on top of each other, and not just that, but like you studying together, you're spending so much, like you basically interacting with each other. Like, oh, would you like to be my partner for this project, working on this assignment? How do I even ask someone that question? It's like asking them out, basically. Like for me, it's
Whoa.
it's very hard because you didn't grow up in that way, and like there is a huge barrier. And I'm already, as a person, kind of introvert, so it made it even harder for me to figure out how to approach the opposite sex. Had it not been for one of my really good friends that I met during orientation week, she kind of eased my way into the world because we had like 3 classes together. So she would like get me to introduce and meet a lot of her girl friends. And in that way I got like better at interacting with the opposite sex in an academic setting. But otherwise, like Mauritius really kind of fucks you up in that way. Like you stuck in your corner. There's a dividing line clearly. I
Again.
feel you might resonate with that. I don't know.
Um, yeah, a little bit. I think what's even more sad is the fact that the teachers themselves would be the ones who would impose that kind of line, that kind of barrier between the
Mm,
girls and the boys. And on top of that, we have the parents that are telling you, "Hey, like don't approach the opposite sex because of XYZ reason." But I think I had always to push myself to forge those friendships with the opposite sex um, outside of school. Through tuition, through mutual friends, because it's very important to know the different sides of society, I guess, and the
yeah,
different kind of energies that flow when you're talking to someone of the opposite sex. And for me personally, I would bond, I guess, more easily with boys for
Same.
different things, right? And you kind of get tired of being around girls the whole day at school. You want that different kind of energy, and obviously when you go to college you see that it's even more different. The setting is more different. The kids that go to college here, they've been in high school in high schools where there were both girls and boys, and for them, coexisting with the opposite sex is so normal. And there's definitely a little bit of an effort that you have to make to sort of integrate that kind
Yeah.
of community as well. So yeah, I think that was my experience. I'm glad that today in Mauritius they're pushing to have the co-ed schools and all of that, which I think would have a very positive impact on how we interact with each other and behave around one another. Yeah.
I really like just to add to that, like at the moment we obviously have this thing where a lot of the national star colleges are being converted into these academies that are going to be co-ed, but at the same time regional schools are still staying the same single sex format as that they always have been. But I guess it's always been like using a couple of schools as a pilot test to eventually sort of like spread the whole, regionalization in the system eventually to the other colleges as well. But there was something very interesting that you mentioned, actually, Priya, and I like that this is really cool. I'm not really sure if this has to do with the fact that we went to the same school, but the fact that you mentioned about this flow of energy, about being masculine or feminine, I felt that pretty strongly as well when I just joined school in Form 1 to like grade 7. Like I was like I noticed for a fact for you as well. Like we've been a little bit of a tomboy growing up, like I would always go for pants over a dress whenever we go to school. There was a period in time where one of our rectors forced all the girls to only wear dresses during winter as well, like summer, and then for winter wear pants. And it was such a traumatic experience. Like obviously you don't really understand what's going on. You're so young. You're 14. You're 15, but like for me it was especially traumatizing. And like I know like this is a little bit of a diverting away, but I really want to make this point. Wearing a pant for me was about my safety in the buses, because you get sexually harassed. There's a lot of street harassment that happens in Mauritius that we don't talk about enough. And it was a layer of protection. So I felt that at a point there was even like these, like this is a very common notion in Mauritius where girls or even boys at times get their phones confiscated whenever they chat with the opposite sex. Um, and I feel like we ourselves do not sexualize the relationship that you're having with the opposite sex, but then
Exactly.
society and parents, by separating us, they are them introducing this whole sexualizing factor into the relationship that can be clearly platonic. Um, but yeah, I want to talk about sexual awakening and how that
Oh,
came to be, given the scenario we were all in, right? Single sex school, you don't really get to know more about the opposite sex clearly from what we just talked about. But it's a very personal question and something that's very different for everybody. Talk to me about how it happened for you, whether school contributed to that in some way or the other. Yeah, Vegen, do you want to go first?
sure. I can take a shot. I think for me, it didn't start at school. And I did not have the amazing chance of having parents who talked about this to me, who told me like, oh, you're gonna experience puberty, what it would mean, that you would be producing sperm, that sometimes you would be having some kind of, I don't know, maybe erotic dreams, for example, and waking up really hard in the morning and feeling like something is not weird, it's just normal, going through, like, it's not a phase, basically, it's how your body is. I didn't have parents who taught me these things. I think I would have my first experience, um I don't know, watching maybe Imran Hashmi movies, like, around even watching those movies like with my parents on the side, and my parents would be like, okay, cache it léger, which basically means like hide your eyes. But we all know how we would hide our eyes, but like there would be little
Peak.
tiny peek, and we would peek into the movies and the scenes, and basically be like, wow, this is interesting. And then, like, past that, there was a phase where I started masturbating without realizing what I was personally doing, really. It was just, it felt good, but nobody ever told me about that. No one at school even told us about that. We started learning about the male and female reproductive system in Form 3, which is basically when we're 15, like
That's pretty late.
14, 15 years old. That's really, really, really late. And even when we learned this, I remember I had memorized all the terms. You know how in biology you have to memorize all the terms of like
Yeah.
the different parts of the reproductive system, and the professor, the not the professors, but the teachers at school would like kind of sexualize it also in a way. I went to a boys' school, so the teachers, when they would talk of vaginas, and obviously the guys would be making a lot of comments, like sexual comments about it in the classroom, and the teacher would not condemn that even, and
Right.
just keep going, right? Which is not good. But kind of like even neither I could not rely on the school nor on my personal family to kind of like join me in my own personal sexual awakening. Um, and it's sad because it's such an important part of our lives and it's part of our education. Someone should have told us about it. But that's my personal experience. I don't know if Priya would have something different here in this case.
Yeah, for me, it's hard to put an exact time of when it happened. It was probably during my early teen days, pretty much like all of us. But I was really exposed to sexuality itself when I was in sixth standard. We had all the biology classes, the sex ed class, but it was very, um, you know, physically like biologically related. It was not giving us any more kind of information around, about our emotions and how that could change. Just all the physical stuff about how your body would change, and that was pretty much it. But at the same time, in sixth standard, I had this one friend who would sort of tell me those different things about attraction, and they even like exposed me to same sex attraction, and I had found that very very strange at the time. But I think as I hit puberty, um, I started discovering myself even more. I did not pay much attention to put myself in a box. I'm not really into labels, but I think I've been, um, pretty much comfortable around different sexualities, and I'm a favorite ally since I was very young. It definitely helped having trustworthy and non-judgmental friends around you, and with whom you could share your concerns or even the spicy details about things that are happening. Um, I would say movies,
Mm.
Tumblr a lot, reading, and I
Those
guess
were his
exposure
times.
yeah, and exposure to like international news, I guess, and like just reading books and blogs
Mm.
around the world definitely helped in the journey of sexual awakening.
Yeah, and like it's very interesting that you draw the line between how the onus of sexual education in Mauritius has been placed on biology for the longest time. And it's
Mm.
definitely something that is more than just, physicality. It has the emotional aptitude, it has the like social and self-awareness part of it as well.
Right.
There's this myth though that I don't know if it's a myth or a reality. Like you guys need to help me out with this one, that it's probably because of the single sex system in Mauritius that the LGBTQ community came to rise. um like a lot of people tackle that angle in a very like, oh yeah, like it's bound to happen if you're putting people of the same sex in the same school together, what else do you expect? How far is that even? Because hearing of you talking about your sexual awakening, it doesn't seem to have any link whatsoever. um but tell me, like, what do you think about when you hear people saying such a thing, that there's a correlation between single sex education and having same sex attraction?
I personally think no, it's not the case. It's just another excuse or another reason that people try to find some kind of some kind of reassurance or
Mm.
some kind of answer to explain what's happening. I It may have been part of the discovery process for certain individuals, but I wouldn't go and say that the gender composition of a school is a determining factor in your sexual orientation. It's just, I guess people are trying to find ways to explain it, right? And there's nothing easier than just blaming the single sex schools. I don't know. What do you think, Megan?
I think it's actually the opposite in my opinion.
Interesting.
Um,
Okay.
I don't know. Like for it's my own personal experience. Like I went to an old boys school. And like I said, I would go to the private tuitions after and see a girl from far. See, for example, I would see Pawina, and then I sort of I don't know I don't know if it was intimidation. I don't, but I never had the courage to like go up to her and speak to her, and that's because we just weren't used to it. But in my mind back then, I was just maybe mentalizing that, oh, I'm not like I'm like freaking out to even go talk to this girl, maybe because I have feelings for this girl. An example, right?
Yeah.
And so having that mindset um, through me is reinforcing the idea that I couldn't be a homosexual person, you know, because I feel like the intimidation I have from approaching someone from the opposite sex comes from my a possible sexual attraction I have to that person. But that's the complete opposite, right?
It's like a
That's
reverse.
it's like a reverse, right? It's
Yeah.
not stemming from a sexual attraction. It's just I'm not used to having a girl like standing next to me in a school setting and having that like comfort level to go and talk to her about math questions or
Yeah.
English essays or anything. But I just took that as a possible sexual attraction,
Yeah.
and that reinforced the idea that, oh, then yeah, you're not gay, you're just attracted to girls. Okay, great. So I felt that single sex schools actually reinforced the I don't know, the movement against the LGBTQ movement. But again, that's my opinion. But I kind of lean strongly also towards what Priya said, in that it's not very correlated. The movement was already there. They're using it as an excuse to say, okay, single sex schools is what's reinforcing the movement itself, but it's not.
It's definitely very interesting that you say that. It's almost that concept of, how um it's a very Bollywood thing to say, but like how distance is meant to nurture longing. And
Yeah.
like that's probably like what you were saying in terms of, like rather the barrier is what's encouraging opposite sex attraction as opposed to kind of like whatever, you want, whatever your gender identity and sexual orientation
Yeah.
is. However, there was a very interesting point as well that you mentioned about how, exactly in this line of thought, that single sex schools might actually, and probably they do, and I actually think they do, but correct me and like let me know what you feel about this, promoting not only gender stereotypes but also homophobia. What was it like being in an environment at school, when it came to perceptions about same-sex attraction? Was there a need to be a covert ally? Was there a need to just not come out at all? Was there an almost how would you say that, like a default sense of not revealing anything because you'll be bullied anyhow? Perception of teachers. What was it like? How was it in terms of gender stereotypes and homophobia at school, in Mauritian schools precisely?
Yeah, I can go first. And in my at my school RSPL, it there was that strong sense of you would be bullied if you do not fit with the binary model. If you are not heterosexual, people would like basically call you pede, like right there, which is a slang Mauritian word for being gay, for example.
And if you're not macho enough, right?
Yeah, you're not macho enough, you're not smoking, oh, you're not even playing football, he's just sitting right there, like, oh, why you like, you're like pity pity like that, right? And there was a lack of allyship for sure. One of my really good friends, not to mention his name, but he came out very early, maybe when we were in form 3 or something, so around middle school, and he was openly gay. And a lot of people, when I say a lot, could be 50%, maybe less, but still it's a majority, it's a big proportion of the school that would bully him on a daily basis. And the other 50% that wouldn't bully him would not be an ally either.
Mhm.
There would be maybe 2 3 kids in a school of what, 400 500, that
Mhm.
would be a strong ally to this one person
Mhm.
who came out. So a lack of support from your own peers, coupled with teachers' perceptions. Teachers, first of all, do not intervene when someone makes a comment calling you a pede. They could like basically shun them off and tell them this is really improper first language and also insulting. that person has the right to any sexual identity that they want to assume, and you shouldn't be targeting them based on their sexual identity. But the teachers never stood for that. That's the first thing. And the second thing is some teachers were actually openly anti homosexuality in general, or were very who would make homophobic comments in the classroom because maybe they stood strongly for it, and also felt that because the majority of the school was kind of homophobic in the student population, they would get like popular support among the students. Students would call him, oh, he's actually a cool teacher. He's like he's making homophobic
So
comments like we do. Yeah, we're the cool teacher. Yeah, we're like, I don't know. So yeah, lack of support from your teachers, lack of protection, I guess, from your own teachers, and the lack of allyship and the constant pressure of bullying.
if
Um,
if I can just like
yeah,
very quickly intervene over here, like sorry to cut your line of thought, but I find this quite interesting as well. And I keep saying quite interesting because like this is really cool. Um, how there is a certain shift in terms of the protection expected from primary school teachers, kindergarten school teachers, and secondary school teachers, and how there's a gradation in terms of the older you get, the less teachers are expected to kind of like condemn bullying or
yeah,
be less political about things. Because in primary school, I'm pretty sure school teachers at primary level have this sort of institutionalization or training that goes towards protecting the emotional makeup of a child. Why does that stop as soon as we're in our teenagehood? And that's very critical because teenagehood is a very essential part of our, you know, journey to becoming adults. But that was just a thought. Please continue.
mm, no. Yeah, so I guess that's actually also very interesting that you mentioned the kind of gradation. Yeah, that you feel in teachers' expectations and how they're here to support and protect you. But yeah, for me, it would have been hard to come out, and I'm gonna be very clear here. I didn't come out until even much later after I went to college. Um, but now when I reflect back on it, like how would I have felt if I had come out? I would never even have had the I don't know, the
Courage.
courage, yeah,
Mhm.
to go out there and be like, I'm gay, and having half of the school basically bullying
Cheer.
you on a daily basis and
Yeah.
having only two friends who support you. And those two friends who support you, bear in mind that even though they are not homosexual, they will start getting bullied as well, just because they are standing up for you.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Yikes.
But that was guys' problem. It's like, let me see what's happening at
Because
Creasy.
I can see Priya's face, and I'm like, I don't quite remember that picture back in school, like at least for our context. But Priya, please go ahead.
Yeah. I think our experience is a little different. I think maybe because we went to an all girls school, right? I would say it was more of a taboo environment rather than a homophobic one. Um, Hate in itself was really observed, um, but I would say there was mostly fear, a little bit of disgust and uncomfort towards anything that didn't follow the norm, right? In my personal experience, I was lucky that I had a group of very open-minded and tolerant friends, and we leaned so much um, on each other. We learned so much from each other, and it's kind of sad that we had to rely on those um, only your peers to get that sort of protection I'm talking about. The teachers would just brush the subject and not really do anything about it, or there would be some ridiculous kind of rules that would apply at school, like do not hug your friends
To
and
just
things.
sit on their laps.
Listen,
Yeah.
all
And
sorts of
trust me,
things
I'll tell
were
you
going on.
something. Sorry, but like at Creasy, we had a huge hugging culture. Like even till date,
Right.
whenever I meet my college mates, I'm like, no, 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 I'm a hugger. And we had this whole thing about we were very physical as girls when it came to like just showing affection, and it did not connect necessarily to just like being part of the same sex attraction, but just yeah, it was
Right.
platonic. Go, sorry.
Yeah, it was sometimes they would misinterpret it just because they didn't know how to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
And for those friends that I had that were a little bit foreign to the idea of same-sex attraction, it would just be a little bit awkward for them, but there was nothing more than that. But I would say, however, that I have personally seen and experienced different kinds of bullying from other students at the school. But again, I wouldn't say that they were really homophobic. I would just say that I would only blame it on their fear of the different. That's where, it stops, I think.
Yeah, that's actually something that I really wanted to talk about because I've been experiencing this given that, like I've got uh, really close family members, a generation beneath, like junior to us, right? Like 7 years younger to us. And I coach these kids who are like part of general English paper, and they have these very interesting conversations around, oh, what do you think about pronouns? Should you like introduce pronouns when you're talking to somebody? And that's not something I could imagine our generation when we were in school. And it feels really
when we
weird to
were
say
in high
our
school.
generation because like we're like old now. But they're having these conversations that are pretty interesting, I feel. And yeah, I just thought I'd share that. I actually wanted to also, because we were on this line of thought, right? Given the experiences that we went through, not having that kind of talking enough about the elephant in the room, kind of, or probably not even knowing that you could healthily have a conversation about our sexual orientations. How important is it, hence, for you today to have allies and to have that support system and to possibly go to a stretch of actively recruiting allies as well? How does it differ today, and how do you feel about if you had done it before?
I came out. I came out this year. Priya knows about it. I came out. I called her and I told her, and she was an ally to me, and it just made a whole difference to my coming out experience. I don't know how your coming out was, if you had that kind of support from your close friends and family. But when I came out, a lot of my friends who were like homosexual or part of the LGBTQ plus identity had already come out. So I had the support of all my friends around me who were like, finally, or like, we kind of knew, but we didn't know. We weren't sure. We thought you
Honestly,
were like your own bubble after the LGBTQ plus. There might be an interrogation mark there
you're
for
the plus.
the plus one. Um, so I don't know. Like, it made a huge difference coming out, knowing that I would have the support. So when I came out, the hardest thing was not coming out to any of my friends because I knew I would have gotten the support. I knew they would be cheering for me. The hardest part was coming out to myself and
Mm.
acknowledging that, okay, Vegan, you are gay. No one is going to bully you today because you've reached certain, I don't know, like level in your life where you're comfortable and happy where you are. And whatever bullshit, I'm sorry for the language, that any other person is going to say to you, that's going to target your sexual identity, like, that's just bullshit again. You have to assume who you are because you only ever live one life, and that's what you have. um, but it made a huge support in my life to have that allyship around me, my best friends, my brother, my cousins. And I want everyone, the younger generations, even the older generations who still haven't come out, it's never too late. Why is there even a coming out? What is that? What is that term even about?
Yeah,
Like, why does it even have to exist? I'm not coming out. I am me.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
entirely.
I just have to have that face because you dare not accept me as who I
Yeah.
am.
I mean, for me, that's the ideal. Not even having to have such a thing as a coming
Yeah.
out. I have personally never done that. I don't think I should have. I should be doing that. I think I've been comfortable with myself since very very young, but obviously it's hard to explain something to someone that's not gonna exactly understand where you're coming from, what all of this means, etc. Right? Um, I think for me, I've had the support of my friends. It was not even a topic of conversation at some point. It was just very normal and embedded in our lives to have those different spectrums of sexuality and gender identity as a whole. Um, Again, I'm very lucky to have had those friends from early on. Um, I think it's only when I went abroad and started meeting new people that I would be a little hesitant in the way I would approach that subject and letting them know about more about myself. But I think I had built that confidence from very young, and having gone through undergrad, I was still navigating it. But now today, if I meet someone new, it's all part of a normal conversation. It's nothing different, and I think I have to thank the setting I'm in, the city I'm in. Right? It's
Oh yeah,
very
in New
much
York.
yeah, it's very much different from back in Mauritius. So yeah, I think that's how it went for me, and we I definitely have much more less fear and like not much to worry about today.
It's actually a good thing that you mentioned that, because it leads into something that I really wanted to address and talk about, which is this whole concept of LGBTQ migration. And that that concept really struck me when I started thinking about, the last batch that just graduated for the HSCs. And I was looking at the scholarship distribution. I was just thinking about just university seeking abroad as well, and I was talking to a lot of my own students as well. And there was this general feeling of not necessarily directly relating to their sexual orientation or the sexual choices they were making in terms of identity, for that matter, but there was this whole notion of we're feeling suffocated. um, we don't feel that a lot of rules and regulations and a lot of laws, a lot of statutory laws, are actually equipped to entertain our existence in Mauritius. And as a default to that, we will have to go. And there is a very strong correlation between Mauritian brain drain and
Mhm.
LGBTQ migration. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think about it? Um, because you want it or not, it is definitely better for any person part of the LGBTQ identity to be in a country that is accommodating to our needs, right? Um, how do you feel about that? What do you have to say about the Mauritian specific context? Um, whoever wants to go first.
Um, I think we talked about this, right,
Yeah,
Vegen? I think it's a very sad motivator, but it's still one. I think for our generation, it was different in the sense that we were leaving Mauritius and going abroad for all these different career opportunities
yeah,
or for education, right? And nowadays, if we think about the newer generation, all those, I think Mauritius is doing better in terms of education, in terms of like all these resources. So these kids, they can have that in Mauritius, but today the premises are different, and these kids, they would want to go just because um, they cannot be themselves in Mauritius, and that's pretty alarming. Knowing that Mauritius is supposed to be a country of tolerance, of culture and all of that, but in reality, it's not really the case. And I think a lot of other motivators as well to leave the island include freedom, um, just independence and épanouissement, right? And definitely all of these, they build your confidence, and they all play an important role in the journey of your sexual orientation and discovering who you
yeah. Your
are.
journey.
I think it can be frustrating when your own home country is not providing that environment for you, right? And but you have to seek and be so desperate to seek it abroad. I think we need to do a much better job back in Mauritius if we don't want that kind of oppression and that kind of um, toxic culture to prevail.
Yeah, and you brought up an important point when you said that the younger generations, like 7 years younger than us, told you that what's your opinion of the pronouns that we should use, for example, which means that that younger generation has a stronger opinion on has on the whole notion of having a sexual identity and where they stand within the LGBTQ plus community. And if that generation does not get the support, not just from parents, forget about parents. I have friends who grew up in the US, um, who, when they came out, their parents weren't always nice to them and be like, oh, I accept you how you are, blah, blah, blah. But definitely, kind of shunned them off, told them, okay, it's a phase, or this kind of thing. And it's in the US, right? So if that happens in Mauritius, I wouldn't blame the parents. It's a generational thing. That's something separate. But when you have your own country, the legal structure in place in the country, the political system itself, that's reinforcing an anti-LGBT um, sentiment around
Agenda.
the
Yeah.
island. When you there's a strong lack of allyship among your own friends. When you go to school where 60-70% of the entire school thinks it's fucked up to be gay, how can you feel comfortable and safe to even come out? So I feel that this younger generation that we're speaking about, it's that generation that is gonna probably um, go through LGBTQ migration.
Mhm.
In our generation, I feel we were still struggling with even identifying our sexual identity. I
Mhm.
didn't even come out to myself until much later in my life. But these kids, they're already thinking about what gender pronouns I should be using,
Yeah,
right?
it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I'm very happy for them, but the country is not there for them,
Yeah,
and they're
and
Oh,
gonna leave.
yeah, and when you're talking about the country and the laws, all of that, right? You know, one thing that comes to my mind is that this whole homophobia and all the whole anti-LGBTQ plus culture that exists in Mauritius is a product of colonialism, if we think
Mm,
about it, right?
oh,
Um, and I think it's kind of sad for a country like Mauritius not being ready to liberate ourselves from that.
yeah,
It's not, only just go fight for Chagos or go fight for rights for everyone, but actually get rid of all those side effects of
yeah,
colonialism that we really need to move towards. And I hope, like, that all the there's a bunch of great groups out there in Mauritius, like Collectif Arc-en-Ciel, or I don't know, the others out there that are doing a great job. And I think, we need to talk more about that in the parliament and all those debates that happen when we pass the bills, etc. Right? And I think the voice of those Mauritians who are fighting, literally fighting for their rights, needs to be put forward more. Yeah.
yeah,
to
definitely.
share on this, there was like a Pan-African survey that was conducted, and it's conducted every 5 years, and it's quite interesting how. And just to share, because I was really researching this topic out, I'm having a different podcast with someone else as well, specifically with regards to queer laws in Mauritius. And to be
Oh God.
honest, a lot of our political sphere members have openly supported the community.
Yeah.
And with regards to the survey I was talking about, the research paper that I read, we have a 50-50, which was like at 42 versus 40, like 48%, 58% split when it comes to being pro or against LGBTQ. And it had a correlation with probably religious background as well. And I think it's more about the population rather than the policymakers as well. And I'll tell you, in terms of probably even sex education, right? And something you were mentioning about how the 7 years younger to us generation, they are the ones who would be more attuned in LGBTQ migration versus like for better grounds and career opportunities, is that this whole questioning they're going through, right? Pronouns, we're more connected to the internet, the digital world, we're having more access to information. If we're not choosing to have a formal and organized sex education class in Mauritius already at this stage, we are letting youngsters for themselves to go and fetch for resources that may not necessarily be legitimate and valid.
Yeah,
When you don't
Mhm.
offer the right information to a generation that's thirsting and lusting for knowledge, you're literally telling them to just go and, find validation that may not be in the right
on
way
TikTok,
possible, right?
right? Yeah,
Um,
oh
yeah,
God.
that was just something. And I also want to share like a very quick like story as well. This is definitely a bit more layered and complex, but just the trans community in Mauritius and access to surgery and um, being able to go for hormone therapy, um, is also something that, trust me, a lot of very young Mauritians, 14 years old, 15-year-olds, and I've met them, and they really want to make those choices for themselves. And I just think that all of this is just a matter of like a little bit of more time, um, before we eventually see these policies being debated in Parliament. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Mhm.
I can
Great.
imagine those ministers debating the future of the LGBTQ plus community in
Yeah.
Mauritius. Like, anyways,
Yeah. There was I guess like there was just two more angles or topics to probably broach. One is probably something that Priya, you want to take, and it's related to how single sex education has benefited women in terms of the confidence gap for the longest time.
mm,
Coming from single sex schools that were only girls, I had like a science background. I don't know to what extent I can speak for it because growing up, I was very outspoken, so I would just like say whatever was on my mind. I would just like ask questions. But I know for a fact that many other women were not necessarily equipped to just like ask a question in class. So in a lot of ways, probably single sex is a good thing when it comes to that positive discrimination towards gender um, um, equity. But
Mhm.
tell me a bit more about that. What do you think?
Um, yeah, I agree that having had a female or all female education has definitely helped us become more confident. As a matter of fact, today when I look at my workplace, right, oftentimes the energy that I feel in meeting rooms that are dominated by females, that energy is much different from when it's dominated by males. Um, and I think this speaks to the fact that whenever you are in a room where the female voices resonate more, it makes you want to share your ideas. It makes you want to open it more. You
yeah.
have that comfortable and welcoming setting for you to speak up. I think during my middle and high school and part of university a little bit, um, I wasn't really conscious of how the system was designed for males or how you were being talked over by males. I would experience it a little bit, but I think I was more focused on achieving my goals that I would not really be aware that all these things are happening around me. And I was just focused on working so hard. And now that I think about it, maybe I was working harder than my male counterparts, right? Um, I was too young in high school or middle school to go fight for that equality, but I wished I did. Now I would definitely point out whenever I see any sort of discrimination that's happening or any sort of behavior that's putting females at a disadvantage. Um, but yeah, coming back to the point that growing up and sharing and doing all those things, working together with females, has definitely shaped me into a more confident person, and I'm very grateful for that.
I don't want to assimilate an opinion here, but I'm kind of curious to know how it would have been different if you have parents who tell you, "Okay, you're a girl. I'm gonna tell you life is gonna be really hard for you ahead," versus having parents who tell you, "Okay, this is a male-dominated world, unfortunately, but you can you can thrive here. You can have your mark. Like you don't have to let it define who you are." Would that have made a difference?
I think, I think so. I think um, it would have placed me in a better spot, prepared me better, um, let me believe that I can achieve those things
Hmm.
without letting all these barriers impede me. But I think to the first point that you said that you have to be careful out there.
Yeah.
It's going to be harder. I think parents would only always speak to what they've experienced and what reality is. I think both go hand in hand, right? Letting your kids know that hey, it's going to be hard, but do not let that stop you,
Stop you. Yeah.
right? And I don't think we even have these conversations. I don't even think that people are aware that this is a problem.
Yeah.
That's the real problem. You're not aware when a male is dominating the conversation. It was not until much further down the line that I realized that is a problem. I will always be like, oh, maybe I'm just too timid, or this is how it is, right? The problem is like not acknowledging that it is a
Yeah.
problem.
And it had to take us to get first to the Western world
Yeah.
to realize that, and not just and just to brush aside that it's not something that has been in the Western world since 10-20 years. It's very new. Even
Mhm.
in my workplace, the movement to like give the voice to a woman in a meeting room, it started maybe like right before COVID.
Mhm.
Can you imagine?
I
It's 2020 and we're still there
Yeah.
in the US, in New York.
I'll actually like confess something, and I don't really talk about this publicly. I talk about a lot of things publicly, but this is one of the things that I still don't feel like I should be talking about because of the backlash that I can receive. And I'll tell you something honestly, the question that you asked, Vegan, like I honestly want to make an episode out of this. I'll tell you why. Growing up, coming from the school background Priya and I came from, it made me so ignorant of patriarchy to an
Yeah.
extent where I
Okay.
started practicing reverse sexism, if you can even say reverse, because there's no opposite towards the amount of oppression that women have faced in history. But I graduated high school, I graduated secondary school, and you join the real world, and I was like, why is that guy speaking? Because I forgot that, like the world is composed of male leaders. And I grew up in this amazing environment of powerful women who would always talk, have the amazing, strongest opinions, who were drivers, school activities, talkers. Even back at home, my mom, amazing, amazing, amazing work in terms of, you know, she never kind of like said that, oh, the world is going to be outrageous out there for you as a girl. But she was always like, regardless, you and your brother are the same. That was
Hmm.
definitely a lot of empowerment given. But I have to admit that for me, it's still really hard for me to kind of like, oh, male leadership, yeah, that's a thing. And
Yeah.
that's me
Right.
saying that, regardless of like knowing that, like we've got political figures in history that have always been like male dominated, right?
The dominated, yeah.
Yeah, because recently when I found out about Jacinda Ardern, right? Like even at Creasy, whenever we would have any kind of conversations, we had a kind of leadership style that was always about compassion and empathy. And when I first had to be in an environment like the MUN, the Middle United Nations simulations in Mauritius, and that's the first time I saw like guys talking and talking about political things, and I saw this more masculine approach towards leadership, and to me that felt very dainty. I felt like, oh, this is not good leadership enough. But no, honestly, like I tell
Yes,
you,
right. Yeah, yeah,
honestly. And this is something that I resonate really a lot when Priya says that, like she was probably working much harder than guys. And Michelle Obama actually wrote it in her book Becoming as well, where she just says that, like if girls are going to pass up the opportunity of seeing much less qualified men make it at the top, there is an issue in society. And to me, to answer your question, Vegan, like your question excites me so much because I feel that I've been blinded. I didn't think the glass ceiling would exist until I made it out of a single sex girls' school. For me, I never saw guys being in charge until I left school. For me, women have always been better leaders. And this is my, in between inverted commas, reverse sexism that I've known. just to
yeah.
share.
I think it's very
It's
interesting.
something that's very weird. Like you're speaking as part of the female identity. I'll speak as part of the male identity. I grew up. I went to school. It was all boys. So in the classroom, the debates we would have, it's only boys. Everything, the I don't know, the leadership speeches that would be given at school, it's by boys. So I grew up like that. And then I went to MUN as well, for example. And that was my first time seeing a girl having
A
a
voice.
voice, a speech on economics, a speech on saving the planet, the climate change, the climate crisis talks, and everything. And for me, like it didn't hit me that, like, from your perspective, seeing a guy taking a leadership position would also feel weird, because for me, when I saw a girl taking a leadership stance, it didn't feel weird to me. It felt as if it was a world that I'm not accustomed to.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, they do their thing, we do our thing. But the difference is that in the real world, unfortunately, politics is heavily male
Oh.
dominated.
Oh.
And I don't see the perspective that you feel as a woman when you take a stance, a political stance in the real world. Because I'm a guy, and when I say something, people just like it's normal. I don't feel anything,
Tend
but
to listen.
maybe
Yeah.
you feel something. Yeah,
Yeah.
you have to listen, like you said.
Because to be honest, like given like at school, we had like debate clubs, we had like civic and human rights clubs, and we teachers listened to us passionately. We were given a certain amount of self-respect, and I never a respect for that matter, right? And I never felt like I should be asking to be listened to until school was over.
Mhm.
Mm.
And that's probably something I like. That's why I wanted to talk about this, because I just wanted to know if there was like a common experience shared that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think for me, everything was like I said, everything was so perfect, right? It was ideal that we grew up in this very um, nice environment where we could where females had their voice, and it was not even a question of, hey, there's this kind of inequality that's out there. It's until you get out of school that you realize that you have to make that extra effort to be heard. And um, I think when I started working, I realized that, and it scared me in a way that I was not prepared for that. I never knew that this was
Neither.
such an issue, and that I had to fight to be heard. And that's kind of, it's kind of scary in its own way,
Very much
because
so.
yeah, because at home, I you know I was not even ever told by my parents that, hey, it's a male dominated world out
Yeah.
there. This was not even a question, because they believed in me, and they believe in that anyone can achieve anything regardless of their sex, right? And yeah, it's kind of scary to see that this is a real issue out there, and there have to be so many policies that companies make to give a quota to promote more women in higher positions, right? So it's unfortunately, this is how the world is right now, and we need to keep fighting.
Definitely. And I think it would be ignorant to feel that this is just part of the older generation. I'll share a little anecdote, and I guess we'll just end on that note. And I'd like to like understand and gauge your reactions out of this, okay? And this is coming from a person from mine and Vegan's batch, went to the same batch as Vegan, and obviously not going to take names whatsoever. And there was somebody who texted me when I released my book last year, um, and they were like, "Oh, I was thinking about doing such a thing as well." And that's like a 24-year-old boy who went to Mauritius. You would like, like same kind of background almost, except for the fact that obviously we went to different schools.
Schools. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, how did you manage to do that being a girl? That's the question that was texted to me.
Wow.
And we're not
As a girl,
talking
Wow.
we're
okay, as a
not
girl.
talking generations older to us. We're not talking about traditionalism. We're not talking about conservatism. We're talking
This
about
is a
our
24-year
generation
old. Yeah.
today, like this year. And he
And,
didn't mean
and,
that in a
and
no, sorry, like just to clarify, he didn't
Yeah.
mean that in a bad way or in a wrong way, but he seemed stunned because he was not exposed to women doing shit. Um, what are your reactions? How do you feel about that?
it's it's definitely surprising. I think you you're thinking from your perspective, and he's seeing things in a different way. It's definitely surprising for us as girls, as females. um, but I think the question stems from the fact that um, the world there's no equality in the world, and that's they are reflecting what the actual situation is. I think
Yeah.
that's where the question is coming from. And
Yeah.
it's unfortunate that it has to be this way, but it is. I don't know
I
about
think
you.
I think our education system needs strong focus on developing empathy. Especially guys need to empathize. I didn't empathize with my female friends until much later, even after I started college. I realized what you girls are going through. Not going through, but like, unfortunately, we're not on the same footing when it comes to where we stand in society, how people look at us, the kind of voice we're given. And that's really bad and really sad. And I don't
Right.
want this. And our we need us guys, we need to develop that empathy and
Yes.
empathize and help and be allies and be there and listen also.
Yeah, because this reminds me of another story where I was telling some of our guy friends in our group that, hey, I have this thing called an imposter syndrome when I'm at work, because I'm obviously in the IT world, in the computer science world, right? And I have this syndrome every day, and I've been talking about that with them, and they were plain surprised. They were like, why do you have this, why is this a problem? They never realized that it is an ongoing problem for
Problem.
us. It's something that we struggle with every day because they are very oblivious to all these things happening. And I think having us, us talking to them about that, made them realize and be more self-aware about how to behave towards females, and how they understood our difficulties even more,
Yeah.
and empathized with us more. And I think they are more conscious about, all the actions and how they will behave now in their work environment, right? So it's surprising, that sometimes people don't realize it, and it's not until you experience it that, you see the world, uh, as how it is in a better way,
It's because of the privilege.
right?
We have a
Yes,
privilege,
the male privilege,
and
right?
the male privilege, and you don't realize it because you have it. Until last year, I never realized that you feel unsafe walking home late in New York City. But I'm always walking home at 1
Wow.
a.m., right?
The amount of
Like,
things that we have to worry about is not
and
the
it
same
didn't
as
hit me
you.
until last year. Like, one of my friends was like, I'm taking the Uber. I'm like, no, why don't you just take the subway? Oh, because I'm a girl. Oh, how is that different? It is different.
It is very much
And
Freaking
I didn't
different.
know about that, right?
Again, to add to your point, I feel that this it's just the single sex education in Mauritius has tailored two different worldviews for men, for a whole generation of men and a whole generation of women altogether. The kind of experiences we live just by being exposed to the limited exposure to the opposite sex, or just the worldview that we have to undergo is tremendous. We literally, like right now, you both are comparing notes, right? We are not far away in terms of ages. We should have had like almost the same amount of social understanding of various things, but literally your life experiences seem to be very different from the life experiences that Priya has had. Um, and to come back probably like to the point of, like how at school we were sort of forced to wear dresses instead of pants. The amount of additional stress girls had to go through to even come to school versus guys to make it through public transport. Like this is one of
Mm,
like part of my life mission, to be very honest. Like street harassment in Mauritius is a scourge that I take very personally. Trust me. And I obviously like I can't go to compare. Probably there's more male bullying that happens with guys that girls don't experience. Like you can't invalidate that. But I think this conversation today just goes to shows exactly the kind of cleavages that um, single sex education has gone to create in terms of our worldviews, each one of us.
Yeah.
Any ending thoughts? How did you feel? What did we miss? What would you like to add?
I don't know. I really hope that, um, like with this new experiment of introducing co-ed schooling, through the academics in Mauritius right now, that the younger generations will have an opportunity to have a different experience, albeit, it's going to be hard because, like you said, a whole generation of men and women have had that single sex schooling. So the teachers in those academies would still have had that experience. And those teachers, unfortunately, could be perpetuating that through, even if we have co-ed schooling going on. Um, we still have a long way to go in Mauritius right now, but I don't
Yeah,
know. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful.
yeah, agreed. Thinking about it, I know I've gone to QC and all of that, but deep down, I wished I went to a co-ed school like MGI or something like that. Friends that I have that come from those co-ed schools, the attitude is different. The
Yeah,
attitude is very different, and I wish that I want Mauritius to be a co-ed
fully co-ed.
nationwide,
Yeah,
right? And I think it needs to start from a young age. We definitely have a long way to go to even start the conversation about gender pronouns and trans rights. We have to have a Mauritius of tolerance, of real tolerance, not just on paper and not just on
yeah.
all these
A
advertisements
culture. It
about
should be
Mauritius.
cultural.
I think there needs to be a movement out there, and I'm very positive that we'll reach there. There are so many groups that are doing a great job in Mauritius, and people, as you mentioned, are more and more aware of all these issues happening in society and
Yeah.
all these pronouns, and you know, just exposure to the rest of the world plays an important role, and I think we need to have more of that in Mauritius, not only for like tolerance towards sexual orientation, but towards like race or social status or different backgrounds and things like that.
Great. Thank you so much. How do you feel?
Yeah, I
This
feel
was cool.
great.
Did
I like
you
the
like
follow-ups.
did you go through it
Yeah,
like